The Babysitter Killer, Oakland County, Michigan, 1976 to 1977. For more than a year in the mid-1970s, the suburbs north of Detroit were paralyzed with fear. 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, were abducted, held for days, and then murdered with chilling precision. The media called the killer the babysitter because of the apparent care taken while the victims were held captive. They were bathed, fed, and dressed in clean clothes before being found dead. More than 45 years later, the case remains unsolved, but many believe the killer or killers may still be alive, hiding behind wealth, privilege, and a wall of silence. The Babysitter Killer remains one of the most disturbing cold cases in American history. The victims. The nightmare began on February 15, 1976, when 12-year-old Mark Stebbins failed to return home from a shopping trip in Ferndale, Michigan. His body was found 4 days later behind a local office building. He had been sexually assaulted and strangled. His clothes were neatly arranged, and he had been bathed. 10 months later, on December 22, 1976, Jill Robinson, 12, had an argument with her mother and left on her bike. The next morning, her bicycle was found behind a hobby store. Her body appeared 3 days later along Interstate 75, shot in the face with a shotgun, fully clothed and clean. Unlike Mark, there were no signs of sexual assault. On January 2, 1977, Christine Mihalich, 10, disappeared from a 7-Eleven just blocks from her home in Berkeley. Her body was discovered 19 days later in a snowbank. She had been smothered and bathed, just like Mark. The final known victim was Timothy King, an 11-year-old boy who vanished on March 16, 1977, after walking to a pharmacy to buy candy. His body was found 6 days later in a shallow ditch. He had been sexually assaulted, suffocated, and fed fried chicken shortly before his death, his favorite meal according to his family. Each victim had been held alive for several days, fed, cleaned, and addressed before being killed. The care shown during captivity contrasted sharply with the brutality of their murders. A pattern emerges. Investigators from multiple jurisdictions formed a task force after the second murder. As the pattern solidified, child, abduction, extended captivity, clean body, authorities became convinced they were hunting a single serial predator, or perhaps a small group working together. The killer displayed meticulous control. There were no signs of struggle at abduction sites, no forensic evidence left behind, and no witnesses who saw the children being taken. Police theorized the killer may have posed as a trustworthy adult, perhaps a police officer or authority figure. The nickname Babysitter Killer stuck because of how the children were groomed and cared for. But the motive was anything but nurturing. Suspects and shadows. Hundreds of suspects were investigated. 2 stood out. The first was Christopher Busch, a wealthy son of a General Motors executive who had been arrested for child pornography and sexual abuse just before the killings stopped. He reportedly had access to a car similar to one seen by witnesses, and sketches found in his home resembled the composite of the possible abductor. Busch was found dead in his home in 1978, officially ruled a suicide. But suspicious details cast doubt. The shotgun blast was reportedly too clean, and there were no fingerprints on the weapon. A drawing of a screaming boy was pinned to the wall above his bed. The second key figure was Gregory Green, a convicted pedophile and associate of Busch. Green died in prison, and no direct evidence tied him to the murders. But his connection to Busch deepened suspicions that the crimes may have involved more than one perpetrator. Years later, DNA taken from a hair found on one of the victims matched a sample from an unidentified person connected to a blue AMC Gremlin, a car repeatedly linked to sightings near the abduction sites. That individual has never been conclusively identified. A network of predators. Many involved in the case now believe the murders were not the work of a lone killer, but part of a larger pedophile ring operating in the Detroit suburbs. This theory gained traction after whistleblowers and journalists uncovered disturbing overlaps between high-level suspects, powerful families, and patterns of abuse that were covered up or ignored. The King family, particularly Timothy's father, Barry King, became vocal critics of the investigation, accusing law enforcement of mishandling evidence and protecting prominent suspects. His tireless efforts kept the case in the public eye for decades. Several law enforcement officials later admitted that the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office may have shielded suspects due to political pressure or influence. The possible involvement of wealthy individuals created what many now describe as an invisible shield over the truth. A legacy of trauma. The Babysitter killer case devastated an entire region. Families no longer let children play outside alone. Halloween trick-or-treating saw a record-low turnout. Residents lived in fear that a killer was watching and that he had connections powerful enough to avoid capture. The murders had a lasting psychological impact on Michigan's legal and investigative landscape, including reforms in multi-jurisdictional cooperation and handling of child abduction cases. Despite renewed interest in the 2000s, including DNA testing, a grand jury, and TV documentaries, no charges have ever been filed. Still at large. More than 45 years later, the case is officially cold, but far from forgotten. In 2013, an anonymous letter surfaced claiming the author had knowledge of the group behind the killings. It described a pedophile ring of 4 men, including a now-dead accomplice. The letter's claims were never verified. In 2022, the Oakland County Sheriff's Office once again called for information, hinting that DNA and new evidence might lead to a break. But so far, the killer or killers remain unpunished. For the families of Mark, Jill, Christine, and Timothy, justice has been a long road paved with grief, frustration, and silence. The babysitter killer shattered more than innocence. It shattered trust in the very institutions meant to protect it.